Well, good morning. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. This is the podcast, The Endurance of Labor Laws. I'm your lovely host, Lesley Sullivan, and today is episode 159. We are going to take a look at part 3 of Marxism/communism, but this is really the foundation of Marxism and discuss those things specifically, kind of look at the history a little bit. Today, we're going to take a snapshot of the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union and how they got started in communism, because again, communism, its roots come from Marxism. So it's one of those things that there were several people that were thinking along the same lines about how to get rid of capitalism, do not promote, or they did not want to promote democracy. And so there were people over in, I would say, eastern parts of Europe and then the Soviet Union over there with the fall of the Russian Empire, they very much did not want hardly anyone to be successful except for, quote unquote, the government. So it's very interesting that they wanted to get rid of their monarchy, their kings, their queens, but yet they put really bad people in charge, which is really bizarre. But we will dive into that in just a moment. I want to first of all give a big shout out to my listeners. So a big shout out to California, Texas, Oklahoma, Virginia, West Virginia, Indiana, Illinois. In terms of countries, the United States, the Russian Federation, Canada, and Uzbekistan. Also, Bangladesh is listening in. Hey, how are you guys doing? It's good to see you. So I love to see all you guys online. And if I did not mention your country, it's probably because I'm not looking at the entire list. So there are quite a few of you that are listening in. Actually, so far, I have been heard in 35 countries and 36 states. So it's really neat to see all that. So I am very grateful for your viewership and for you listening in. It's really cool. So let's go ahead and dive into this. So I'm going to be reading from different articles and take a look at the history of Marxism here. And as we dive in, we will probably see common trends of socialism that kind of pick up steam and things like that. And what's interesting is that whenever socialism picks up steam, it very much leads to communism and then fascism. But what's really interesting is that socialism is basically the little cousin of communism and Marxism. So it's one of those ways of thinking that, on the surface, does it seem like it's bad? Because it makes these promises of, we want to take care of people, we want to provide for people, all these things. Well, just be very cautious and careful whenever someone says they want to provide for you, they want to take care of everything for you. It's probably never appropriate to have a sugar daddy, even in a movie, you know what I mean? You have to be careful about what you are willing to compromise. That's the thing, because whenever someone makes promises like that, more than likely you are losing out on your individual freedoms. And that's not right in any country on the face of this earth. So that's why the United States very much strives for freedom and democracy, because we know firsthand that if you do not have freedom, you do not have democracy and you do not have liberty. So all those things are very much intertwined. What's intertwined with Marxism and communism is lack of human rights, violation of human rights, lack of democracy, lack of capitalism, horrible economies. There's usually famine, death, and disease, and that probably sounds extreme, but it is extreme. I mean, all you have to do is look at the history of the Soviet Union, especially when Joseph Stalin was in charge. And then also, you can kind of take a look at what's going on in Russia right now. It's not the Soviet Union per se, but Vladimir Putin, their president, quote unquote president, because I don't know why anyone would vote for him. I really do not, because he is ex-KGB. Again, you need to be careful who you put into power, because you need to look at, okay, what were they raised in? What kind of occupation did they have in their 20s, 30s, and 40s? And then why do they think the way they do now? Putin very much wants all those, the entire Soviet bloc to be a part of Russia again. He doesn't think they should be independent. He doesn't think they have the right to be their own country. So what are you going to do? Don't vote for him. And if you have a bad leader, find a legal, moral, ethical way to boot them out, because the power is with the people, not with the state. So FYI, be aware of that. So in terms of the Russian Revolution and the Soviet Union, it says that, this is from an article I found online, it says, with the October Revolution in 1917, so this goes back to the turn of the century, right? The Bolsheviks took power from the Russian Provisional Government. So here's the thing, the Bolsheviks, they were some pretty bad people. And so you have to remember that the Russian Tsar, and his family were brutally murdered. Brutally. And when I say his family, I mean him, his wife, all of his children, even their daughters and things of that nature. Because sometimes when people think about wiping out a family line, they think about just killing the boys. No, this was like complete annihilation of any type of monarchy. So they did not even give them a chance. They did not even give them a chance to start a new life elsewhere. They literally had them murdered because they're anarchists. I mean, not the Tsar, but the people that murdered them were anarchists. So you have to remember that when it comes to anyone that is an anarchist, they do not have your best intentions in mind, because if they're willing to murder these people over here, for the sake of we disagree with them, then what do you think they're going to do to you or your family if ever they don't agree with what you're doing? See, you cannot justify murder. Murder is never the answer. It's one thing to defend yourself. For example, if you have a home invasion and somebody breaks in and is trying to kill you or your family, that is completely different. That is self-defense, and that's you defending your home. The Tsar and his family, they were very much brutally murdered. And so the Bolsheviks and this revolution, they wanted all monarchies and all empires to fall because they wanted it to be communism. They wanted the entire world to basically be under Russia, under the Soviet Union, but be Marxist and communist. Like, that was really what they thought was going to happen if they take out all these monarchies. And I'm just thinking, I mean, how first of all, how evil can you be, but also how dumb can you be? So needless to say, monarchies, I'm not always for them, but I'm not completely against them, because, what's interesting is that, monarchies, a lot of them did have a good reign, and a lot of them did care about their citizens. Now, was every single king or queen great? No. In fact, there were many that were horrible. But what's interesting is that the Tsar of Russia actually took better care of his citizens than the Communist Party and the Bolsheviks. So what's interesting is that the elitists within Marxism and communism, they want people to believe that, oh, we're going to take better care of you and we're making all these promises. But what's interesting is that the moment their Tsar was murdered, that's when all hell broke loose. And that's when poverty really picked up speed. Because these Marxists, they wanted to take over the entire country, and they got not all of them, but a lot of peasants and the masses to believe them, because they basically made these promises of bread and property and things like that, because they got them to think and believe that their Tsar was the problem. And yes, the Tsar was not the best. I mean, there were some issues, but what's interesting is that the citizens of Russia, or the citizens of the Russian Empire at that time, once their Tsar was murdered and his family was murdered, the people of the Soviet Union suffered way worse under Marxism and communism than what they endured under their Tsar. So was their Tsar a perfect leader? No, nobody's perfect. Nobody on the face of this earth is perfect except for Jesus, right? So it's one of those things, like, you cannot expect perfection, but you should never settle for less than God's best. And I think going along with Marxism and communism is settling for way less than God's best, because, first of all, Marxists and communists, they do everything they can to shut down churches immediately. Like, they shut down churches, they take over banks, and they try and confiscate people's property. So it's kind of like, wow, so they're claiming to care about people by suppressing them. See, that's why that kind of thinking just does not make sense. And so that's why you have to be careful about who you elect into office, or what, how do I describe this? What ideologies or theories that you go along with, because you should never believe in something that destroys you or your neighbor. And you should never believe in something or vote for something that limits your rights, especially as a citizen and as a right as a human being. So, I mentioned those two things because, here in the United States, we have rights that a lot of other countries don't, right? So in the United States, when we are voting, we already know that we have the right to vote, correct? So it's different than when people vote, like, for example, in corrupt countries. Like, there are so many corrupt countries over in Africa, in that area, in that region. Not everybody has the right to vote. So needless to say, when they do vote on something, or when they do make a change or a shift in their government, first of all, they have to establish that everybody that is a citizen of their country has a right to vote. Because if you don't establish that foundation, then you're basically not going to be able to fight off or stop or, how to describe this, stop or prevent as much as possible human rights violations. Because if you don't have the right to vote and you don't have the mindset within your government officials that, hey, all life has value, then it doesn't matter how much you fight, you will never be considered human. And so then your rights will be violated. So that's where human rights violations come into play, because again, countries that have democracy and freedom and that focus on the rights of the individual, not the collective, which again, Marxism and communism, they don't want you to think as individual. The elitists don't, right? They want you to think as a collective because they know that as a collective, they can fool more people. And they can lull people into a false sense of security that, oh, well, we'll give you property, but we just don't want you to make a lot of money. Well, who decides that for somebody else? Like, it just makes no sense. Well, if you enable your government and your leaders to promote stagnation and oppression, even though they're promising you stuff, me personally, I would question that and think, okay, wait a second. They're offering me property and land, but who are they to offer anything? Like, they don't actually own the entire country. See, here's the thing. If ever someone, or I shouldn't say someone, if ever your government is saying, oh, we don't want you to have all these rights, but we'll give you property instead. Well, first of all, who did they take that property away from? Because, land typically does not belong to the state unless the state or government purchases it, almost like, for example, in the United States, we do have land that is owned by the federal government. An example of that would be our state parks, as well as our national parks. So that is property that they actually own and that, you and I cannot purchase. But one of the problems that I would say that landowners have been having an issue with here in the United States, whenever we get a Democrat in office, especially a liberal or a progressive, they tend to use the EPA and the EPA laws to confiscate, illegally, mind you, confiscate property from landowners, from property owners here in the United States. And they say, oh, well, the government needs that. You have to move. There's a problem with the land, or we need to research something. So then a lot of property owners that own their own private property, a lot of them cannot afford to fight the federal government, because you have to remember the federal government in the United States has pretty much a blank check, to be able to fight people as long as they want, because they have our tax dollars. So needless to say, our federal government, unfortunately, has gotten into the bad habit of acting like Marxists and communists, where they confiscate illegally, unlawfully, and very much unethical. They have gotten into a bad habit of stealing and thieving people's property, but yet making it seem like the citizen is the problem. How is that any different than what the Bolsheviks did? How is that any different than what the Marxists did? And how is that any different than what communists did back then and what they're doing today, but in other countries? So that's why it really matters whoever we elect into office, because, how I describe this, whenever you elect someone into office, typically they nominate people or put people into positions of power to help run the government. And they can do that. It's kind of like, they have a staff and everything. But here's the thing. You have to remember that some of the biggest problems that we have here in the United States is not necessarily our president. In fact, it's very rare to have a tremendous problem with our president. Usually, it's these federal agencies that are being run by elitists, okay? These elitists that think that we're morons, we're peons, we're peasants, and oh, they're geniuses. They know everything, and we can't sue them, and if we do, we will go bankrupt, the government will not. Because again, the federal government runs off of our tax dollars, right? So just be aware of that. So it's one of those things that, under Marxism and communism, you can't fight your government. You can't. You cannot. I mean, can you imagine someone in China, a Chinese citizen, which citizenship over there is a joke, really, because a lot of them are slaves. But anyway, if a citizen over there in China, did not like something that the Chinese government was doing, do you really think that they could hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for what they're doing? I mean, I don't mean to laugh, but it's like, when you put something so evil, so anti-human into office, and the longer you leave it there in office, the harder it is to fight it. It's not impossible. In fact, it's very possible. But it's difficult sometimes. So it's one of those things that, here in the United States, under our Constitution of the United States and under your Constitution of your individual states, like, for example, the Constitution of Oklahoma is completely different and separate than the Constitution of Texas. The Constitution of Texas is written extremely well. There is a reason why Texas always threatens to leave. It's like, where are you going to go? You're still part of our continent, of North America, but I understand what they're saying, right? But I just always find it funny whenever Texas, I love my Texans, I have family down there, but their Constitution is written really well. Not as good as the Constitution of the United States, of course, but it's one of those things that if you don't have freedom, if you don't have democracy, if you don't have capitalism, it's virtually almost impossible to fight off really bad people, bad leaders, and get your country to go in the right direction. That's the problem. So the Soviet Union, aka the Russian Empire, has been going in the wrong direction since before the turn of the century. So please be aware of that Putin is not the only problem. Russia has had issues for a long time, and these issues really stem back, I would say, to Marxism and Lenin. I really think a lot of their issues in regards to what's going on now, and in between that timeline of when Lenin had his epiphany of how to mistreat people but make it seem like they really care. And it's like, no, you don't, you evil dictator, which technically he was in power like what we think of today. But it's one of those things that you have to be careful about these things because, as we've seen in times past with a lot of the labor unions and trade unions that we have discussed, a lot of them are founded on Marxism. And it just blew me away. I just thought, what in the world? Like, who would found in their right mind, who would start an organization based on Marxism or communism because it goes directly against having a labor union? Because under communism and Marxism, there are no workers' rights. You're basically a slave. They give you these promises, they make these promises, they give you a crappy car. You're not really allowed to move where you want to move. The Communist Party decides what job you have and you stay there forever, just like the caste system in India, which again has never really left there. The caste system is very much very relevant to India, but it's still being practiced mostly in their villages, places outside their cities, although they don't like to admit that. India is very similar to China in that they try and make it seem like they are a democracy, but just in different ways. I think India strives more to be a democracy as opposed to China because they're communist, but it's one of those things that it's very easy for not so good countries to fly under the radar because if they can make it seem like, oh yes, we care. See, we have an economy, we have a currency, we have a private sector, we have a public sector. We're just like you, the United States. No, you're not. Because you are still oppressing your people in different ways. Like whatever issues we have going on here in the United States, it is nothing compared to other countries, nothing. Do I like everything that happens in the United States? No. By all means, no. But I count my blessings and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for what we do have because what we do have is not readily available in any other country, even in the UK, like even in Ireland and France. I mean, those countries are socialist, or even Canada, with the Playboy, their Prime Minister, Trudeau. Had to think of his name. I should remember his name because he's a moron. So he's an idiot. I mean, he's driving his people nuts. But again, you get what you vote for, right? So if you don't like what someone's doing and they are in public office, don't vote for them. And if they violate your laws of your country, you get them out. Legally, morally, and ethically, you do it. So that's one reason why you have to have a constitution, you have to have a framework in order for freedom to work. Because if you don't have a framework, you just have a false ideology that just wants to imprison people, then, what you're going to get is a very awful lifestyle that hardly anybody will ever enjoy. And also, what's interesting within communism and Marxism is there's absolutely positively no middle class. There's hardly any rich people, there's a few, but they are allowed to be rich by the government. Almost everybody else is extremely poor. So I think sometimes, I don't like to say they take it for granted because I don't think we actually do, but I just think some people are ignorant that if you don't have a middle class, then you don't have a stable economy. Because the middle class is where most people want to be, because they want that mobility. They want to be able to go from being poor to middle class and then from middle class to upper class. But if you have no middle class, then people know when they don't have much to strive for, so they typically give up. So that's one reason why a lot of these communist countries, why they hardly have any revolutions where they are actually successful at dethroning their dictators, because they have so many underpaid workers that have been forced into poverty that they don't even understand what it means to be middle class and what it means to move up, because they've been suppressed so long they don't know what it's like to have a real job. All they know is what the state says to do. They don't know what real freedom is. They don't understand, the world economy. One thing that communism and Marxism loves to do is it loves to keep people in the dark all the time, not just in the short term, but in the long term, because, what's interesting is that, whenever I post my podcast and I always put a description, one of the things that I always put is knowledge is power. I put that there for a reason, because it's one of those things that I can think of many situations in my life where I found out something after the fact and I thought, if I had known this piece of information beforehand, it would have changed the outcome tremendously. So knowledge is power, and plus knowledge enables you to have a better future. But if your people, as well as yourself, if you don't have that knowledge, if you don't have that good foundation, then you're not going to go anywhere. If anything, you're going to sink lower and lower into oppression and into suppression. And, what's interesting is that, we talked about how the Communist Party, they very much like to indoctrinate, right? So they have these academies that they developed over in the Soviet Union so that they could promote and indoctrinate people into thinking, communism and Marxism is the way to go, because they don't want people to question the system. Whereas under a democracy, you have every right to question the system, because you want to make sure that the system is for you and for your neighbor. Like, you want to make sure that the system is fair, there is equality, there is liberty, and there is freedom. Because if you're not having these checks and balances within the system of your country, it's a free-for-all for corruption, which is exactly what happened in the Soviet Union under Marxism, Leninism, and communism. So it's like having really bad triplets, right? So, you have to be careful in terms of theology and ideology. So just FYI, be aware of that, because there are ways of thinking that can make or break your country. So I always encourage, not only myself, but other people that, life can be tough sometimes, but that doesn't mean you give up. And always have a positive opinion of your situation and your country, because even if your country is not perfect, having an idea and a positive opinion and just a positive mindset of what you want for yourself and for your family is basically what you want for your country. Because if you don't want to suffer, then you don't want your country to suffer. You know what I mean? Because to care about yourself is not selfish. It's actually smart. Because if I have found that whenever people, they care about their life, their health, their happiness, they typically radiate that out to other people, and they care about other people. But typically when people do not have a positive opinion of themselves or their situation, regardless of how happy or sad it is, when they do not have a positive opinion of it or positive viewpoint of, hey, I can get through this, Tough times don't last, but tough people do. This is temporary. I will push through this. When people don't have that tough mindset that they know they are going to have a better day and a better future, then they tend to think that everything is bad and they complain about every little thing. I'm like, wow, the United States was not founded based on a comment box or a complaint box at work. It was founded by people that wanted true liberty because they knew that what was going on in the original 13 colonies prior to the United States being founded, what was going on there was not right. It wasn't as bad as what was going on later on in the Soviet Union. But here's the thing. If you want something bad enough, and especially if it is good and true, you will fight for it. You will defend it and you will protect it. Marxism and communism are not worth protecting or defending because, if anything, it takes human life. It destroys it. I mean, we know that millions of people were murdered and died under Marxism, communism, and under the Soviet Union. So, I mean, it's one of those things that you have to be careful which basket you put your eggs in, because it's your future that matters, and as an individual, not as a collective. Because under communism and Marxism, again, they don't want people to know what's going on. They don't want you to think as an individual. They want you to not realize that you have individual human rights. They just want to be able to put you in a group so that way they can control the group. So, because they know that's very difficult to control individual people. So that's why they have this mind control of manipulating people into Marxism and communism because, again, it's easier to lull people into a false sense of security if they are already in a group as opposed to trying to fool people on an individual basis. And plus, it takes more time, to be blunt, it takes more time to fool people individually, whereas you can fool an entire segment of a population. So, in the United States, we're not fooled. So, if people really want to practice democracy, then they need to throw out anything and everything that is foolish. Anything and everything that hinders your rights, for democracy, liberty, and freedom and capitalism, because without those things, you don't really have a stable country whatsoever, and it will be almost impossible for you to have a better future. So just know that. But it says here, getting back to this, it says the Bolsheviks established the first socialist state based on the ideas of Soviet democracy and Leninism. So here's the thing. You cannot have democracy under Marxism, Leninism, or anything to do with the Soviet Union, because under democracy, the individual has rights. But under Marxism and communism, individuals do not have rights. So you can say that, oh, we are creating a better state by being socialist. Well, again, socialism is the little cousin to communism and Marxism. It's just a weaker form of it, but it is a stepping stone towards someone, usually a dictator, someone really evil, slowly sucking you dry of your rights, your liberty, and your happiness. So why forfeit that? Just stay away from the bad, go towards the good is what I say. It says their newly formed federal state promised, useless promises, right? That's what socialists love to do. They love to make promises. Their newly formed federal state promised to end Russian involvement in World War I and establish a revolutionary worker state. Wow. Here's what socialists love to do. And this is also, I think, very common with liberals and progressives. They love to make these promises, but they hitch them to something. So they ask a question like, well, do you want the war to end? Would you like us to bring, your men home? Well, of course, people want their sons and their husbands to come home, right? But they say, well, if you want us to end the war, then you must want a worker state because you want people to come home and be happy. See, that's the lie, and that's the catch. They make it seem like they care about people, but they really don't. So it's like, okay, you say that you really want your husband or your sons to come home, but if you don't want a worker state, then are you really for us ending the war? I mean, are you for killing your own citizens? See, they turn it, they twist it. So they piggyback things together. So you have to be careful about people's promises because it's one of those things, what it reminds me of? It reminds me of, whenever I'm working with people in an office and whenever someone over compliments me, I'm like, what do you want? Just like, what do you want? You're over complimenting me because there's an ulterior motive. What do you want? It's the same thing. When someone makes a promise like that, like what these people did, they're saying, oh, we're making you a promise, but this is what we want you to do. Like, we will get us out of the war, but you have to want a worker state. And for us to be in charge of it, not you, the citizens. See, that's the thing. It's like a tick for tack. Whenever someone is doing a tick for tack, you need to pump the brake on that. And pump it quick. I don't care what kind of brake you have, but you pump the brake because, freedoms and liberty are not tick for tack. You either have them or you don't. And if someone really cares about you and if they really love you, then they would never ask you to sacrifice your liberty or your freedoms, especially in exchange for communism or Marxism. Because those are two forms of very interesting suppression, come to find out. It says, following the October Revolution, the Soviet government struggled with the white movement and several independence movements in the Russian Civil War. Okay, so it's talking about the white movement. It's not talking about white people and the problem with white people, which is BS, excuse my language. What's talking about is that there were two different groups of people that either A, they agreed with Marxism and communism, which were the Reds. That's why commies are typically called a Red. The whites were people, it wasn't based on their skin color. It was based on the fact that they were not for communism. They actually wanted true freedom in their country within the Soviet Union. However, tried as much as they did, communism prevailed and prevailed for a long time. So the white movement is referring to people that were against communism. So communists were known as Reds. People that were for capitalism were known as whites, because there were many people in the Soviet Union, in Russia, the Russian Empire, that knew that communism was not going to work. It was not going to work because they knew they needed capitalism, because there were people living there that understood democracy. They wanted it. They heard about it from the United States, and also they wanted a stable economy. Unfortunately, communism prevailed. And you know what? The Soviet Union suffered greatly, and millions of citizens lost their lives because of communism. So just be aware of that and false promises. It says this period is marked by the establishment of many socialist policies, so beginning of socialism, right, at least in this country, and the development of new socialist ideas, mainly in the form of Marxism and Leninism. What's interesting is that Marxism, Leninism, and communism, they always start out socialist, and they make these promises in the forms of socialist policies and these socialist programs, basically welfare programs, that basically bankrupt your country. But yet it gives really bad people that are in charge of your government permission to overtax you and to take what rightfully belongs to you. So that's why you have to be careful about all of these federal programs that any and every government is trying to pass, all these social welfare programs, because if it's not affordable, it's not affordable. The federal government, especially of the United States, is not known for balancing its budget. In fact, we have so much debt. And the thing that gets really old is whenever a president gets in there, whether Democrat, Republican, they blame the predecessor, the previous president. It's like, you know what? Blaming gets really old. Just handle it. Just handle it. Like, I don't want to hear, oh, well, Obama gave this to me, or President Bush gave this to me. This is what I inherited. Get over it. Suck it up, get in there, and get it done. Like, we are the United States. We are successful. Like, we know how to pay our bills, obviously. But unfortunately, the federal government is, I guess, sticking its head in the sand because it suffers from ostrich syndrome, and it's not paying its bills. So that's why we have trillions of dollars of debt. And so, one of the solutions that the federal government likes to do, it says, oh, well, these government policies will handle this. These new social welfare programs, they will help with this. No, they won't. It causes inflation. It raises the debt. And it's just like, if you are already overspending, how does it make sense to spend even more? And that's technically what Trudeau is doing right now in Canada. Him and his stupid goons and his party, which, mind you, he was elected to this, so stupid Canada, stop voting for morons, right? If you don't like high taxes, don't vote for a moron that's for taking your money. Hello. Trudeau, he is for, him and his goons and his party, they are for, and they're trying to get past tripling the carbon tax in Canada. And it's the middle of winter in Canada. It's like, dude, has this guy not stepped outside and, felt the cold air? Has he not ever been tempted to buy a fur because it's freezing cold outside? Like, you don't triple a tax on anything like that, but especially a carbon tax, because people have to have heat and electricity. I mean, do you want people's pipes to freeze? Do you want people to not be able to provide for their families? Like, think about it. If you're taxed at a triple rate, okay, just for using your utilities, that's electricity, running water, your refrigerator, your oven, your stove, a ceiling fan, the thermostat, whatever the case may be. Like, it is so bizarre to me when leaders like, oh, we care about the environment, but let's punish people. Here's the thing. This is what I was talking about in times past in a previous podcast. We are part of the environment. Human beings, like, we are the environment and we live in this environment, right? So we are part of it. We are not separated from our environment. If people were separated from their environment, then we would be able to live without oxygen, but we can't. Like, we need oxygen. Like, we need trees and plants, and they need us. Like, it's cohabitation, right? We need each other, right? So here's the thing. If you have a stupid leader like Trudeau, which I pray that he's healed of his stupidity, amen. In Jesus' mighty name I pray, amen, because he is very stupid. When you have a leader that is just so environmentally bizarre and is claiming that, oh, we've got to handle global warming by making it so that people don't have heat when it's freezing cold outside, like people could freeze to death in their homes. Like, you know what that reminds me of? That reminds me of Jimmy Carter when he was president. One of the worst presidents, although President Obama was worse than him. But here's the thing. Jimmy Carter, we were having an energy crisis here in the United States during his presidency. And he actually had a message put on TV where he said basically that we are in an energy crisis. We need to use less fuel, less coal. And he said we need to wear our sweaters. And he was wearing a sweater. I was like, oh my gosh, the president of the United States told people to wear a sweater? Good luck with that. Like, oh my gosh. That's a great way to lose your next presidency, right? But see, that's the stupidity of liberals and progressives. Not all Democrats are like that. Like, give me a moderate Democrat, because they're not morons. They're not like that. They may be Democrat, but they're not morons. But it's just like, just the stupidity of telling your own citizens, oh, it's going to be cold out. It's going to be cold in your home. So, instead of having access to heat and electricity, you should just wear your sweater. So, oh gosh. It's just funny because I'm like, wow, that's coming from your leader that obviously doesn't care about you. It's the same with Trudeau. He doesn't care about his people, but yet he makes it seem like, oh, I care about the environment, therefore I care about you. No, because if you're punishing your people for cranking up the heat so they don't freeze to death, then you're not for people, and technically you're not for the environment, because we are part of the environment. Like, technically people are at the top of the food chain. So we have the responsibility to be good stewards, right? But being a good steward does not give your leader of any country permission to oppress their people, and that's what Trudeau is doing. He is oppressing his people, but I guess there are some people that love electing a playboy. He's a moron and an idiot. He looks like he used to look like a model, when he was younger. I don't think so much now. I think the longer someone doesn't live a good life, I think the more it takes away from their natural beauty. And, Trudeau is not a beautiful person, but, he used to be way more handsome when he was younger. But I think the longer you're in a lifestyle that you don't really care about other people, I think it creates an inner harshness and an inner hatred for other people. I think eventually that comes out and it starts to show its true colors, is what I mean. So needless to say, I think his wife could have married better, but yeah, that's just my personal opinion. I feel sorry for her because she's married to a moron, and I bet she knows it. So she's probably thinking, why did I marry this man? He better never tell me to wear a sweater. That's what I'm thinking. And she probably owns a frying pan for that reason. So anyway, Moving on, it says in 1919, the Soviet government, so again, around the turn of the century, in 1919, the Soviet government established the Communist Academy. So they want to indoctrinate people, right? So this is also the time when they were closing down a lot of schools that they did not think would promote communism. And this is also around the same time that they started forbidding artists and writers from painting and writing what was going on in the country. You know, it's as I've mentioned in times past in regards to that documentary I saw that's called Forbidden Art. Whenever you have a government that controls basically the news, the media, everything, you have no freedom whatsoever. And so the government, the communist government knew that these artists, they were not going along with the Communist Party, and they were going to paint and portray what was actually going on in the country. And some of those artists died and or were arrested and tortured because they were not going to paint these pleasant peasants, because here's the thing, it was actually a mandate from the Communist Party, from the communist government in the Soviet Union, that if you are a painter, any kind of artist, you cannot portray or paint, draw, or sculpt anything that tells the world what is actually going on in the Soviet Union. And the only thing that you can paint, sculpt, or write about is just these pleasant peasants. And it's like, you gotta be kidding me, but that is exactly what happened. And so a lot of this started when the government established their communist academies, because they did not want free thinking. Because again, communism does not believe in the individual. It believes in the collective. So whenever you have a government or an entity, let's say you have an employer, that doesn't value the individual employees, that's a problem, right? So here's the thing. It's very important that people be honored and appreciated, for who they are as an individual, because you have individual rights. Like the rights that you and I have here in the United States, it's not as a collective. It's as individual men and women of the citizens of the United States. So, needless to say, whenever someone can group you into something, you basically become a pack of lemmings. And so if your government wants you to go off the edge of a cliff, typically the lemmings go. That is where this is being established in these academies. So that's why, we need to be careful about some of these liberal colleges that we have here in the United States that also get millions and millions of dollars of our tax dollars through federal grants from the federal government. I say if a school can't afford to stay open, it needs to close or balance its books. So maybe they should start balancing their books instead of just expecting us to give them millions of dollars via the federal government. So just FYI, be aware of that, because your tax dollars are definitely being spent in a lot of wrong and bad places. So moving on, it says in 1919, the Soviet government established the Communist Academy and the Marx-Engels-Lenin Institute for doctrinal Marxist study, and to publish official ideological and research documents for the Russian Communist Party. So here they are trying to control freedom of speech, meaning it's no longer free. You no longer have that freedom. If you're going to write or talk about anything, it has to be about how great Marxism is, how great Leninism is, how wonderful the Communist Party is. That's basically what's going on in Communist China right now. Like if any of their citizens say anything bad or negative about their party, the Communist Party of China, or the People's Republic, it's not a republic, it's a joke, but that's what they call themselves, the People's Republic of China is a communist country. But if you say anything bad about that government, especially if you're a citizen, they round you up, lock you up, torture you, and sometimes just execute you. And then sometimes what the Communist Party does over there in China, if they really are low or strapped for cash, whenever they round you up and execute you, sometimes they sell your body to science. So they make money off of people they execute. That came out several years ago when they were executing a bunch of people in prison. They had been issued a death sentence. And so instead of the families getting the bodies back and being able to give them a burial of whatever that would be, because again, Christianity is not really allowed or tolerated in China. The families were like, where is our relative's body? And the Communist Party in China said, oh, we don't know. Well, they did some research and they found out that the communist government in China was selling people's bodies to make money off of them, and they were selling these bodies for research. So, they don't value human life when someone's alive, much less when they're dead. That's a very common trend in communism. It's harsh, but it's true. So it says, with Lenin's death in 1924, there was an internal struggle in the Soviet communist movement, mainly between Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky, in the form of right opposition and left opposition. So it's kind of like what I said in times past, where you have a template, right? Let's say this nail file, I love it. Let's say this nail file is Marxism. Well, typically what happens is you have one guy over here that says, oh, well, we want to make this kind of communism. Then one guy over here says, oh, well, I want this kind of communism for the country. They were having this struggle of what kind of communism do they want, but they were both interpreting Marxism in different ways. It's one of those things that I'm so glad we don't have that here in the United States, because you either have freedom or you don't. It's not interpretive. Either you're free or you're not, right? That's the great thing about capitalism, democracy, liberty, and freedom. Either you have them or you don't. What's really interesting is whenever people, they set up puppet governments in their countries and they make it seem like they are a democracy, but all they've done is they just basically want the icing on the cake or the cherry on top, but they're not willing to put the work in to make the cake. Basically, they want the money and the currency from capitalism and democracy, but they don't want their people to be free. They don't want people to make millions of dollars, because they think that, hey, if people are successful, then we won't have any control over them. Not true. I mean, take a look at the United States. Like, the government does have some control over us. It's not complete control, because we, the people, are the government. So we dictate what laws and regulations that we deem are appropriate, moral, legal, and ethical. So we do that via, first of all, we elect certain people into office, and also we have ways of conducting our courts that are far better than any other country. Is it flawless? No. We could definitely work on a lot of things, but it's like I've said in times past, we are not corrupt like other countries like Jamaica and Haiti and so many countries in Africa. I mean, unbelievably corrupt. Like over there, if you don't want to be convicted of something, all you have to do is pay a judge off. I mean, if you do that here, you just extended your sentence. You just really, you very much are not ever getting parole if you do that here in the United States. So it's one of those things that, laws, I think what a lot of younger people, and I'm not old, I'm only 38, but I think there are a lot of people, I don't know if they're called millennials or Generation Z or whatever they're called, but they kind of have this bizarre way of thinking that everything's fair, everything's free, and we should have inclusion. And it's like, well, inclusion is such a lie. And we've talked about that in times past, and I'll touch on it just a moment here. Inclusion, what I have found, is the more an organization says they're inclusive, the more they don't really want you. Because the moment they disagree with you, they're like, oh, we don't agree with you, and we believe in being inclusive, so you have to change what you think, otherwise you're not being inclusive. And it's like, no, that's not what that means. Inclusiveness means that you include someone regardless of what they think or say or what they believe. Unfortunately, these younger people, they think that everything's fair, everything's free. They don't have to pay for their college. They don't have to, their college should be free. They don't have to pay for gas. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, these people, they just, I guess they've never balanced a checkbook. I mean, it's just like, like when you go buy your weed, do you tell your drug dealer, oh, I shouldn't have to pay for that? No, you pay your drug dealer, right? I mean, it's just like, and I know some of them smoke weed. But anyway, it's very interesting, this bizarre indoctrination. But a lot of these weird ideologies that these younger people are getting, they're getting it from our Marxist universities, and they're also now getting it from critical race theory in public schools that is being taught to minors, basically anyone that is under the age of 18. How is that type of indoctrination any different than what these people did around the turn of the century in the Soviet Union, and very much were oppressing people? You either think like us or you're out. So they're claiming that as long as you're communist or Marxist, oh, this is inclusive because you're part of the party. But the moment you doubt what they think, say, or do, you're out, you're no longer wanted. I mean, this government in the Soviet Union actually exiled people to Siberia. And who knows if hardly any of those people survived. I mean, that's what is so, it's such a lie, inclusivism, because here's the thing, like I remember being in school, having different jobs when I was younger, where we didn't have this inclusiveness policy in HR. This was when HR hadn't really revved up, and this was back in the day when HR didn't really control companies like they do now. I think HR departments very much manipulate and control companies, and I think that's a mistake. And so what's interesting is the more powerful HR gets, the worse workplace violence has increased and the worse it has gotten. I've noticed that because back in the day, it was just common for people to treat each other with dignity and respect. Are people perfect? No, but typically you let your manager handle anything that, hey, this guy's bugging me or this woman's being mean. I've tried to resolve it. What's the deal? You handle it. Now it's always an HR issue. It's like all HR does is encourage people to complain. And now we have super sensitive young people that go on TikTok, make their videos, play the victim. And it's like, you know what? Stop being the victim, grow up, and recognize that, sorry, there's gnats over here, and realize that not everything is fair, not everything is free, and sometimes you have to fight for your freedom. And here's the thing, if you do not fight for your freedom, then that to me, that's a sign that someone doesn't have integrity. Because it's like, well, if you don't believe in fighting for your freedom, and I don't necessarily mean joining a military or things like that, I just mean like our everyday decisions and our actions is how we fight for freedom. So needless to say, like whenever I say that I am against communism and Marxism, that is me fighting for my freedom. Because I know that as a woman, not as a feminist, but as a woman, under Marxism, Leninism, and communism, I would virtually have no rights, almost like Sharia law. There is no liberty in those forms of government. The only way that I have freedom and liberty is under democracy, capitalism. I mean, if you don't have those two, it's usually women and children that suffer the worst when we don't have those liberties and freedoms. It's just how it is. So, you know what I find interesting is whenever, when there are younger people like in their teens and 20s these days, I just don't understand where they're coming from. Not because I'm older and I'm almost 40 or anything, but because I remember when I was their age, it would never dawn on me to go onto a media platform and just complain about everything. And then be disrespectful to my employer. Like, you know, it's just bizarre to me. And plus, I remember when I was younger, in my teens and 20s, you know, I still believe in my country, but yeah, I'll give this example. I remember when I was 17 years old, I could not wait to turn 18 so that way I could register to vote. Like I was counting the days. I think I was counting the days from ever since I was a little girl because I was like, oh, when do I get to vote? Because I thought it was always cool whenever my parents got to go vote. There was just this optimism. Oh, when I turn 18, I'm going to get to vote. Now these 18-year-olds and these 20-something-year-olds, like, it's like they don't have anything to look forward to. It's like, do you not realize, you know, how important you are in a non-arrogant way to society? Do you not realize how important it is for you to be educated, not by elitists and communists, but for you to understand your country's history and to understand where we're at right now as a country and where we're going, and it's not always in the best direction? I mean, I just think it's interesting, you know, that these young people, especially in universities right now, they are shouting down and being so disrespectful to their professors and doing everything they can to get them fired. Oh man, back in the day, that stuff never happened. I mean, it never dawned on me to heckle or be cruel or mean to a professor that I disagreed with. Almost all of my professors were liberal progressives that were horrible people, that were not pro-American. They definitely were not Republican. They did not believe in capitalism, but yet they wanted to get paid. And they wanted to get paid a big paycheck because they're elitist professors, right? So, but it never dawned on me to yell at them, heckle them, get them fired. I just thought, well, this is a class I have to take. I'm just trying to get my degree. You know, I have no control over what this moron says. I'm just going to write my papers or take my classes and just get it done. Like, that's just what you do in college. If your course is part of your degree, you take the course not to agree with everything that comes out of someone's mouth, but to get your degree. unfortunately, a lot of these young people these days, they think that, well, if I don't agree with someone, I can just get them fired. Do you realize that that's a violation of federal law and goes against almost every HR policy, unless, of course, you are HR and you help people get fired, but you're not ethical, moral, or you don't really care to do things by the book. You don't really believe in the laws of the United States, which is typically sometimes what happens in HR and things of that nature. But it's just kind of like, just their thinking, some of these people that are teeny boppers and in their 20s, I'm just like, where in the world is this coming from? Well, where it's coming from is from Marxism and communism. That's where it's coming from. Like, we've got all these little anarchists, but they're really weak, wimpy, whiny people. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? I mean, it's just like they're super offended. It's like, if you say one thing that doesn't go along with their thinking, they're like, I'm offended, hashtag I'm against you. It's like, get over your sweet little self. I mean, there are so many things that are more important than a hashtag or a social movement or grassroots or something. And it's just like, you know what? I remember back in the day when a social movement or a grassroots event, it used to be something good. It used to have good intentions, and now things are just off the rail. And it's just, whenever I see those social movements or I see like a grassroots meeting or something like that, I'm just like, okay, it's probably liberal, it's probably progressive, and it's probably anti-United States. And I'm just like, you know what? Here's the thing. If we don't have the United States, we don't have a country. Think about that. Like, if you are against the United States, what are you for? Do you think that by being against the United States, you're going to be seen as a genius by our enemies? You are in for a big surprise. They hate Americans. Even if an American is against America, our enemies do not respect someone that turns against their own country, even if they agree with them, because they know that that's a traitor. I mean, it's just one of those things that if you're going to stand for something good. Stand up for your country. Instead of turning against your country, make it better. Care about it. Be genuine. Be kind. Be all these good things that we are supposed to be. I just think it's really important that people understand that, there are so many things that I don't like about the United States, but I don't hate anything about the United States. And how I view the United States has changed over time because, people grow. And, you have different life experiences. But, the way I felt about my country when I was 18 is different than how I feel about now. I still very much love my country. I'm still, a very loyal citizen. But now that I'm 38, I'm getting older, I'm noticing a lot of dangerous trends. I'm like, okay, that's not pro-America. That's not pro-America. That's not for the human family. That's not for traditional marriage. I'm just like, what is going on? It's like, there's so many things that are going on in the United States that are not pro-America. It's actually tearing America apart, but yet the liberals and the progressives are making it seem like, well, this is the new American way. I'm like, no, it's not. Because if you think that America, sorry, these gnats are everywhere. If you think that America should be leftist and liberal and progressive, I think you need to read about the history of the Soviet Union and communism and Marxism, which is why we're going over this in more detail. It's just like, I don't want those things here in the United States. I know they're already here, but I don't ever want them to get into a position of power. Because that's where the Russian people really made their mistake. Yes, they were not happy with their czar, their monarchies, whatever, but what they put in place of it was way worse. And, there are things that, I don't agree with in the United States, but I don't hate my country. I think there are a lot of people that they are Americans, they were born here, and because they're falling for these false ideologies that are anti-America, they are quickly becoming very hateful towards their own country. That's not right. If you want to make things better, don't turn your back on your country. Actually do what you can to save your country from imploding. You know what I mean? Like, you have to really think outside of yourself. And what I've noticed about some of these younger people that are in their late teens, early 20s, especially these that go to these elitist schools, they get out in the workforce. I've met some of them. I'm like, wow, you're in for a really rude wake-up call because I don't think you understand how to work with people. Like, a lot of these young people are walking, talking HR nightmares. And I feel sorry sometimes for HR, even though HR has caused some of this with their own theology and their ideologies. But it's like, they don't understand the difference between right and wrong and just a simple difference of opinion. That, a lot of these people that are Marxist and communist and just anti-America, they think that if your opinion does not align up with theirs, it's an automatic right and wrong situation. You've offended me, therefore you're wrong. You're the problem, not me. It's like, no. There's a difference between a situation having a good outcome or a bad outcome, or maybe someone did something illegal or immoral. That is completely different than just having a difference of opinion. However, if you apply these harsh right and wrong kind of modes of thinking to things that, hey, having an opinion isn't necessarily right or wrong. It's just an opinion. But if you apply these kind of unrealistic totalities to something like this, to a person's freedom of speech, then you're basically making it so that people no longer have freedom of speech. That is exactly what happened in the Soviet Union. And that's why the Russian Empire fell, became the Soviet Union, and then the Soviet Union fell into communism. A lot of people suffered, millions of people, not just World War II, but after that for a long time. And even still to this day, they still have some problems. Even though they claim to be free and democracy and all this stuff, I don't fully believe it, because they have President Putin, who is ex-KGB. He's their president, quote unquote president. I mean, like that wasn't rigged. I mean, give me a break, but it's one of those things that, I remember being in college, and I'll close with this. I always thought it was odd whenever we had students in our class that were Marxist or communist. And I'm like, are you from the United States? Yeah, I'm from Oklahoma. I'm like, how can someone from Oklahoma be Marxist or communist? I mean, just be anti-America and just weird and just, whoa, just some of the things that would come out of their mouth in our great discussions. But it was rare to have those people. Now we have a whole lot of young people that think like that. So if you have all these people that sound like anarchists coming out of our universities, I think we know where the indoctrination is taking place. It's not just in the news. It's not just in their everyday life. A lot of these kids are being taught very anti-America things at these universities. I'm like, well, you know what? If you don't like the United States, that's fine, but you can leave. I mean, you don't have to stay where you're unhappy, but don't ruin it for everybody else. But see, here's the thing. These kids, a lot of them are spoiled, rotten, super offended, touchy-feely, just super sensitive kids. I mean, it's just unbelievable. It's just, anything can just pop their bubble. It's bizarre. I mean, you could say the sky is blue, and they're like, no, it's gray. You offended me. It's like, wow, what day is it? Doomsday? Give me a break. So it's one of those things that, there's a difference in learning a theology or a way of thinking just to understand history. It's completely different to be indoctrinated into something that gets a large segment of the population to doubt and question their country in such a way that they're okay if it gets destroyed. But here's the thing, if you're okay with your very way of living being destroyed, that's really dumb, because then you won't have a way of living anymore. Like, if you think about, if the United States becomes completely and totally Marxist and communist, we won't have a middle class. We'll have massive poverty, massive debt. Our currency will tank. Our banking system will fail. Even stockbrokers, hedge fund managers, they will be squealing, or they might just leave the country. Who knows? And we will have way less rich people, way less. Like, here's the thing. Instead of having a lot of rich people, we will have very few. And those very few will be picked by the communist or Marxist government to be rich. Because that's what happens in communist countries. They pick and choose who they think should make a lot of money and who should not. Because they only want people that they can manipulate to have access to a lot of money. Otherwise, they get rid of them or they just take their money and they force them to be poor, which is exactly what happened in the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Vietnam, China. I'm trying to think of some other countries. I'll get a list of communist countries, but that is typically what happens when you put your government in charge of every little thing. Guess what? That means you have no control over anything. Congratulations, you just threw away your liberty. So please be smart, and please recognize that your rights, your freedoms matter very much. You are an individual. You very much matter as an individual. You are not a collective. You are a person that is involved in a society. And if you live and or work in the United States, you know that we have a good country. You know that we have it good. So please do not do or vote things or for things that are anti-America, because you are throwing away your livelihood and you're throwing away future generations from having a stable country. I mean, do we really want to end up like Haiti? I mean, here's the thing. We send support and funds, all the time to Haiti and all these other countries. It's like, okay, if we don't want that kind of life, then we should not be embracing things that would send us down that path, is what I'm trying to say. Like, we need to be careful about indoctrination, because I don't believe in indoctrination of any kind. I just don't. I think we should teach our children the history of the United States, let them form their own conclusions, and let them grow as a human being. Let them be an individual. As long as, I have a rule, as long as what you're doing is legal and moral, you're fine, because you're covered by the laws of your land, and more importantly, you're covered by the laws of our God. So that's why you have to do everything. Whenever you do something, it's legal and moral, because just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral. So please be aware of that. But, it's one of those things that as long as you're covering those two bases, you're good to go. You're good to go, and just live your life. Be happy, be good, be true. Always, always. But until next time, I will go ahead and end this podcast. But as usual, I pray that you're happy, healthy, and whole, that you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you so much. God bless. Bye-bye.